So I'll look to Amanda for roll call.
Peter Shaka,
Here?
Bo Bigelow,
Here.
Cassandra Meehan,
Here.
Casey Kendall. Mr. Chairman, we do not need a quorum for today, but we do have a quorum. Today, the intent of today is really to be conversational and provide an opportunity for us to dialogue, for you to ask any questions about serving on the Redevelopment Commission. And so we'll start with doing an introduction. If each of you would come to the podium one at a time, I'll just call your names. And the purpose is simply to be able to give an introduction of yourself and get a feel for what it feels like at the podium. So, Chairman, I'm going to call you up first.
All right, thank you. Hi, Peter Shaka, Gilbert, Arizona. I think some retreats, not retreats, but some planning and zoning commissions and council, you need to state a name for the address, for the record, right? An address?
Yeah, you usually state your name and the city that you live in. So, yep.
Yeah. So Peter Shaka, Gilbert, Arizona. I didn't know how formal this needed to be, but it is interesting to be on this side of the podium where we never really have the opportunity to stand over here. So it is interesting to address the commissioners. And so I don't know how prepared this needed to be, so I didn't prepare.
You want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, what
Sure.
you do, and maybe what you like about having served on the Redevelopment Commission and hope to achieve?
Perfect. Sometimes someone's past kind of helps paint a picture of why they serve and who they are today. So I was born in New York, came out here when I was 5. From 5 to age 20, I went to Scottsdale Christian Academy and a public high school, Shadow Mountain High School. But age 20, I was attending Grand Canyon University, and there was an opportunity to go overseas for 3 months to teach English. And I wound up staying for 10 years in Taiwan. And I bring that up only to say where I lived in Taiwan, I didn't realize today how that impacted how I felt about walkability, about walkable amenities, about conveniences, about public transportation. So having spent 10 years, over nearly a decade living in Taiwan, I really learned what's nice about living in a very highly densely populated area with a lot of conveniences for food or dry cleaners or flowers or just getting around. And so that made an impact on me, not knowing that it did. And having to move back after 10 years in Taiwan, I moved to Chandler only because my wife's sisters were living in Chandler. And we lived very close to downtown Chandler. So over the following 20 years, we've acquired 5, 6 commercial properties, 4 or 5 residential homes in the downtown Chandler area. So having those properties in downtown Chandler provides opportunity to serve there. So I'm the chairman of the downtown Chandler. It's called the Downtown Chandler Community Partnership. And so unlike this commission, it's more, we do collect tax dollars through property tax, and it's a EMSD. They don't have that in Gilbert, but Phoenix does not have one, but Chandler has one, Mesa has one, and through a portion of your property tax, Bo, you own property, a portion of it goes to supplying the budget, which is the staff and the need for promotion, for marketing, and safety, which is on the heels of what the city of Chandler already does in downtown Chandler. So we'll do additional promotion, we'll make sure there's some additional Christmas tree lighting, make sure that additional power washing if need be. So the money is used really to make sure the merchants know that, kind of like if you were renting in a mall, that someone there is to advocate for you and to help build your business. And so I serve in that capacity there. But buying my home in Gilbert in 2006, just 2 years later, I saw my home price plummet to 1/2 its value. And at the same time, I watched downtown Gilbert just get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And so I've always loved downtowns. I love downtown Gilbert. And so on the heels of the recession, downtown Gilbert really made a real impact on, wow, for a long time, if you know the history, Grain Belt, Gonzo's, there was a couple of things that were very stale and stagnant for a long time. And then you had the right people come in at the right time, and with the town's support, really make a change. And so as I saw my value of my property go down, I saw the value and the vibe and the energy around downtown Gilbert really pick up. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Valley, but there is a downtown Buckeye, never been. There's not a downtown Goodyear. There's probably a downtown Queen Creek, but I'm not sure exactly where it is. But if you think about downtowns in our valley, different downtowns either don't exist in your mind mentally, or they do because of the demographics. You have Tempe, which is an interesting, cool downtown. You have Scottsdale, interesting downtown. You have Chandler, you have Gilbert. But there's a lot of cities that don't have that downtown and that identity. And so whether you're a resident, we have some residents here tonight, or whether you're a property owner or a developer, or you're an architect who lives in Gilbert, the downtown, any downtown really across America is really the heart and the soul of any community, right? And it should be. And so when I mentioned, downtown Buckeye has a downtown, but is it the heart and soul of that community? I don't know. Goodyear doesn't have one. Maybe they do. I don't know where it's at. The point is, it's the heart and soul, and it's really should represent how the town council feels about the entire town. And it should be a place where people gather and they have great memories. They take photos with their children at the water tower. And it's something that really are memories and I think it could be not life-changing, but it's a place where people gather together for any purpose. So we have a nice diversity of businesses in our downtown, education in our downtown, gift shops, furniture store, a lot, Granted, across the valley, a lot of people think downtown Gilbert is, it's a place to drink, and it's really not. If you really kind of study, it is, but I mean, if you study how things kind of wind down at what time of day, we have a great community of people who eat and drink responsibly, who enjoy our downtown. I think we're really fortunate to have the kind of downtown that we have. So I serve on this commission with that purpose. And when I applied for the job like 3 or 4 years ago, not the job, but the position as a commissioner, having lived overseas, it was 30 years ago, I'm 53 this year, I've been to many, many countries, and I always wind up being in their town center. And every single time, and not on purpose, because that's where you go. If you're gonna go to Barcelona, if you're gonna go to Rome, you wind up being at those town centers, and you realize there's a lot of rich history. And our town is no different. So a lot of history is made outside of our downtown as far as farmers and agriculture and the railroad, but it's always that immediate downtown that people live and work, and it's a really part of their day-to-day fabric. And so people that really care, and I care, and that's why I serve on this commission.
Thank you. Commissioner Bigelow, you're up to bat.
I'm Bo Bigelow, and I've been in Gilbert pretty much all my life. I'm actually from Seattle, Washington originally, but when I was about 6, so just after Peter, I moved here to the Valley. And I actually grew up in the Islands, which is a very well-known neighborhood, right on Cooper and Warner. And it was funny because when I went to elementary school, went to Islands Elementary, then I ended up going to South Valley Junior High, and I was the first year from when it had opened, and that was probably 15 years ago. And when I went to South Valley, there was nothing out there. I mean, it's just farmland, and I would tell people I went to South Valley, and they had no idea what junior, they didn't even know if it was in Gilbert. And then from there, I actually went to Highland High, and that was even more farmland. I mean, the Morrison Ranch we see today was just, there was one little pocket, and then the rest was just all farms. And it's funny to look back. I'm turning 30 this year in August, and it's funny to look back at my finite time in during high school and when I was driving and hanging out, and anytime we wanted to go somewhere, it would be downtown Mesa, it would be Tempe or Scottsdale or Chandler. But Gilbert, I mean, downtown Gilbert, we would go to Joe's Barbecue or Oregano's, but it wasn't kind of an epicenter or an area where we would gather and come together. And so I've been in construction pretty much all my life, and I own a few investment properties in downtown Gilbert. I personally live there. I've been there for about 6 years, and I absolutely love it. But the thing that kind of struck me is just looking past the past 6 years and how much it's changed. It's honestly amazing. I know we owe a lot of that credit to the commissioners, but really it's Amanda Elliott who's been kind of spearheading this and kind of keeping it going along the way. And I look at how far it's come in so few years, and it just gets me excited to see what's going to be happening and how it's going to keep progressing and how it's going to all tie together. And so being a resident of Gilbert and just being a resident of downtown Gilbert, I really appreciate you guys and everything you do, and you know, it's probably one of the main reasons I became a commissioner or part of this, the Redevelopment Commission, was just to kind of help out and, you know, see what I can do to you know, help it further come along.
Thank you, and certainly thank you for the accolade, but I don't do it by myself. We have an amazing staff in economic development and in planning, and certainly with our council and our residents and those who get involved. So feel very fortunate to work with incredible individuals, including you all. Okay, Commissioner Meehan, you're up.
Hello, I'm Cassandra Meehan. I am a 21-year resident of the town of Gilbert. That's not consecutive. I was raised here. I moved out of Gilbert and then I came back. I am excited about raising my children in Gilbert, just a few miles from where I was raised. I enjoy taking them to the parks that I grew up going to and taking them to a different location for some restaurants. The farmhouse definitely isn't where it was when I was little, but I'm enjoying seeing the town that I was raised in kind of from a new perspective of my children's eyes and watching them experience the town that I love. And I'm excited to be a part of this committee because it kind of marries the things that I love. It marries my hometown with architecture. I'm an architect. I've been practicing since 2007. I joke that I'm not a well-rounded one because almost my entire experience is in hospitals. But I've done my fair share of other market sectors and lower acuity medical facilities that are not just hospitals. So yeah, I'm excited about this opportunity to serve as the newest commissioner. Everyone's been very inviting and welcoming, so I am grateful for that. And so thank you.
Thank you so much. I just, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to let you know that Casey is on the line and is watching. So I was letting him know if he has any questions that he can jump in at any point. But with that, if our town attorney, Chris Payne, is ready, talk about Robert's Rules of Orders, he gets to do the fun part. Go ahead, jump on in. It's meant to be conversational, so.
Did Casey, is he just listening? Did he want to do any kind of intro as well, or no? It was more of like a podium time, I realized.
Yeah.
Did he want to do it or no? If he can, that's fine. Just curious.
I will circle back with you on that if he wants to do an intro.
I can do a quick intro.
Great. Thanks, Casey.
I apologize for not being in person. That was fully my plan, and we just had a last minute emergency. My wife was called out of town, so I apologize. My name is Casey Kendall. I live in Gilbert. I actually live across the street from the islands. So, Bo, I'm maybe in your old neighborhood off of Warner and Cooper. I jokingly say that my wife and I found Gilbert by accident. It was the best mistake we ever made. Oh, how's that? It was the best mistake we ever made. And since moving to Gilbert in 2012, purchasing our home in 2014, we've had 2 children. They go to school here in Gilbert. I've seen over the last 9 years, the downtown change tremendously. In fact, I think when we moved here, there was Postino's and Joe's. So the growth that we've seen has just been absolutely amazing. And really my idea behind it is to give back to my community. I love the town of Gilbert, and I love living here. And if I can help in any way, that's really why I'm here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Casey. All right, we're going to go ahead and get the Robert's Rules of Order presentation up.
All right. Commissioners, my name's Chris Payne. I don't know if I've met any of you. John Baird usually covers the Redevelopment Commission meetings for the Attorney's Office. But I'm the town attorney. If you're all right, I'm just going to sit here and run it from here. So we're just going to give a brief review of Robert's Rules of Orders. Per the town code, it's actually a code requirement that all public meetings be run under the Robert's Rules of Order. So we're going to talk about that and then get into why we do it and just the main general motions that you really need to be aware of. Robert's Rules, this is the small book. It's impossible to learn. It's really built for a large parliamentary body like what England has. And so when we have small bodies like the Town Council or Redevelopment Commission, most of the rules really aren't applicable, but they're all out there. So we'll go through that real quick. And as we go through this, if you have any questions, stop and we can chat. Real quick, it was developed by this guy. I don't think you probably care very much, but it came from 1876. He's trying to run church meetings and just was having a hard time. He developed what eventually became Robert's Rules of Orders. There's the big book, and this book that I have. I also have Robert's Rules for Dummies as well, a simplified version because it is very complicated. So what are they? They're a set of rules for conduct at meetings, and we use them obviously for our public meetings. Allows everyone to be heard, all the commissioners, all the board members, all the council members, and to make decisions without confusion. So the purpose is to provide order to our public meetings. Why are they important? You know, most organizations use Robert's Rules, and if they don't, they use a different version of Robert's Rules. Again, it's maintain order, guarantee impartiality. It gives a voice to in this case, every commission member, because you all have an equal vote and you all need to have an equal voice when you're debating and discussing items and voting on items. And then you see what happens if you have a meeting that's poorly facilitated. It's just a waste of time. People stop attending, commissioners stop attending. So here's some basic rules. I won't go through them all, but a couple that are very important is all members' rights are equal. You all have an equal vote. And then once a decision is made, an identical motion must not be brought forward at the same meeting. So if you vote on a topic and it's approval of something or a recommendation for something, that's it. That item's dead for the day. You can't bring it back up. There are reconsiderations that could happen, and there's a way to do a motion for a reconsideration. But for the most part, once a decision is made, a vote is taken, that's it. You move on to the next topic. Silence is consent is another one. If you don't vote, then that goes for yes. So as commissioners, you have a duty to vote, and we'll get into it a bit. You have a duty to vote on an item unless you have a conflict, or you declare a conflict. The town council many years ago adopted an ethics policy, which I'll make sure you all get a copy of. I've got a copy of it right here, and I'll just it says, and I'm going to read your duty to vote. It says abstaining from voting, and this applies to Redevelopment Commission, applies to Planning Commission, all boards and commissions, even the town council. A public official should not abstain from voting on a matter before his or her public body unless she has a conflict of interest or believes that he or she may have a conflict of interest or personal interest. Other than that, you have to vote. You can't just say, I'm not going to vote thinking that, hey, this is a hard question. I don't want to get in the middle of it. As commissioners, you have a duty to make your voice heard, even if it's not popular. And then we can get in. I know you've all had conflicts of interest training. That's the one exception, that if you have a conflict of interest, you cannot vote. Or if you think you can't be impartial, then you should not vote. But apart from that, you have to vote on every matter, every pending motion. Oh, correct. So, sorry, I was about to call you Kathy. Councilmember Tilke asked a question. How do you declare a conflict? You do that before the discussion starts on the item. There should be, and are they up there? Are there forms up there? Do you know? Or if you, okay. So if you feel like you have a conflict of interest on a matter, it's gonna, and we know what the conflict of interest, if it affects you've got a pecuniary interest, or a close family member has a pecuniary interest, which is a monetary interest in an item that's going to come before you. So you're going to vote on on an item, make a recommendation on something that's going to impact the property you own. That's a conflict of interest. Before the meeting starts, talk to Amanda. We have a form that you fill out. Hey, I'm going to declare a conflict on item number 5. And that means you can't participate in the discussion. Certainly you can't participate in the vote, but you shouldn't participate in the discussion either. My recommendation is just step aside, go in the back, grab some M&Ms. Don't even be present while they talk about that, because what you don't want to be viewed as having any type of impact. And what you cannot do either as a commissioner is to say, hey, I have a conflict, and then come down and then talk as a citizen about that item. As a commissioner, you have effectively given up some First Amendment rights that you have. The conflict rules trump your right to speak. So if you have a conflict, you cannot speak on the item, even as a citizen, in the call to citizens or the communications from the public. Any questions about that?
Yes, Town Attorney, I do. So it's a positive or negative impact. And let's say Bo and I own property in downtown Gilbert, and the Apple store wants to come build an Apple. And we believe that's going to positively impact or maybe negatively impact our property values, but maybe it's not adjacent to. I guess everything ultimately that's happening in recent years in downtown Gilbert benefits commissioners if we have some kind of interest in property ownership in downtown. So at some point, we can always come to you for clarification whether you think it's...
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to contact me, contact John Baird if you have any questions. It's a direct pecuniary interest, so in that scenario, no. If it's just a general thing that would benefit generally, but if it would benefit your property in particular, then yes, that would be a conflict. And there's also the appearance of a conflict. So the state law talks about it's you or a direct family member, which would be, a spouse, parents, siblings, children. It does not include first cousins. If you've got a contract or something that's coming before you and it's a first cousin, that's not a legal conflict, but it could be viewed as an appearance. And in that scenario, you might feel like, hey, I cannot be impartial or be viewed as impartial. So you may want to declare a conflict even though it's not a direct conflict under the law. And if you have any questions about that, always feel free to reach out to us. The rights of the minority, again, the whole point of this is to make sure every commissioner, you've all been appointed by the council, you have equal authority on your votes, and we want to make sure everyone has the voice and everyone has the right to be heard. So the chair, these are some of the obligations that a chair has. Obviously, preside and maintain order, understand any bylaws, procedures of council, or in this case, the commission, recognize business, remain fair and impartial, and be familiar with the agenda beforehand obviously helps a lot. The quorum is just +1, so in this case we have a 5-member commission, right? So 3 is what you need to conduct business. If you don't have 3, you cannot conduct business. Interestingly, on that third bullet point, you can start a meeting without a quorum present, but you can't do any business unless a quorum shows up. And if someone leaves and you lose the quorum, then you can't do any more business. So at least 3 is what you need. So let's just talk quickly about motions. This is the way we approve items or make recommendations. So we know what a motion is. It's made to introduce an item. You consider things one at a time, but you can, and the council do this quite a bit on consent items. You can lump things in if you're making a motion to approve a number of different items. You can lump more than one thing in. But that would be more on the consent calendar or maybe even a public hearing. But you generally only do that if you're not going to have any discussion or public discussion on an item. Then you can just put multiple items into one. Just the last point, that the person that makes the motion has the right to speak first on that motion. So a motion's a call to action. It can be a request to do something. Typically, it's a request to vote. It could be a request to change something. Under the Roberts rules, it has to be seconded or the motion dies. So if one of you says, hey, I move to approve this item, and there's no second, then that motion's dead, and then a separate motion can be entertained. So, and that's up to the chair to recognize that, hey, is there a second? If no second, okay, the motion is dead. I'll entertain new motions. So that's kind of what the chair's role is in dealing with motions, is understanding what's out on the floor, and has there been a second? If so, then we can move on with that discussion. If not, then you're going to wait to entertain another motion or a competing motion. So the motion is what we say down here. Hey, I think we should consider doing this. This is what we want to do. So after a motion is made in a second, then the item is on the floor, whatever that motion is. Motion to approve, this agenda item. And then once it's on the floor, there's no ownership of the motion, whoever made the motion. You can't withdraw it, you can't change it. That item is what's up for debate after it's been seconded, and that's the item that needs to be discussed. If someone wants to make an amendment, we'll talk about that, but that's the item that needs to be voted on. So we'll talk about the vote. Like we talked about, you cannot abstain unless you have a conflict, which you need to declare beforehand. So everyone has a duty to vote. You can vote against the motion that you made, and that's totally fine. But you can't speak against that motion. That's a Robert's Rules thing. A tie vote, say you got a quorum and there's 4 people, someone makes the motion to approve and it's 2-2, then that motion's dead. You need a majority to pass. So just something to remember if you're ever in a scenario where you have just 4 commissioners and not either 3 or 5. And let's see, most motions it's 50% for the Redevelopment Commission. There are times in our town code where the town council has to do, an item to pass, it has to be 2/3 or 3/4. But most of the time it's the majority. If in this scenario with the Redevelopment Commission, if there's any time that you need more than just a simple majority, we'll let you know on that. But I don't think that is for the Redevelopment Commission.
And quick question on that. So in
Yeah.
a tie, 2-2 for ours, because I think something very similar could have happened. Does it, when it's dead, then it comes back a following month perhaps, if there's a change to the staff's recommendation and another presentation?
It could. If it gets agendized by staff at a later meeting, that's fine. But for that meeting, that motion or that item is dead. If you have a vote and it's a tie, it's as if it lost. So, and then motions to amend. So say someone makes a motion to approve an item, and then that item gets seconded. So now it's on the floor. What can be done is a commissioner can say, well, I'm going to move to amend that motion. And so I move to amend that motion, and then you got to state what you want to do. So a motion to approve, well, I'm going to move to amend that motion. I move to approve subject to, and then you state a condition. And so what that means is that original motion is kind of set aside, and what's going to be debated is that motion to amend. That's what needs to be debated. So the first discussion has to be on the amendment, and you talk about the amendment. As long as it's seconded, the motion to amend has to be seconded, and then that's what's on the floor. That's what's on for everyone to talk about. And then you take a vote on that amendment. And if that amendment passes, then you go down to the original motion, and now that new motion is the motion with the amendment. That makes sense. If the amendment does not pass, then that's dead, and now you go back to the original motion, and that's what gets discussed and voted on. So any questions about that?
So just to be clear, with the amendment, it's if someone's up there presenting something and we're going to approve it, but we could say, hey, I meant to approve this project if they do the following, saying like, as long as they, put these trees in or, whatever we want changed. But we like the general idea. We just want 1 or 2 things, to be assurances.
Correct. So what you do, say there's a motion to approve the project, right?
Yeah.
Or recommend approval. And there's a second, so that's what's before the board. And Commissioner Bigelow, if you're like, hey, I like the project, but I want to add this amendment to it, then you move to amend. Okay. Yeah. So go ahead.
I have an example that we'll go through after this too, but
Okay.
for example, like if the motion is we move to approve the findings and approve DR 111 new heritage building. And then an amendment comes forward and says, you have a second, but then there's an amendment that says, I move to amend the original motion by adding a 10-foot step back at the third floor as a condition of approval. So let's say you've had that dialogue, you hear that 10-foot step back, someone can amend that, it needs a second. Now, you can have an amendment to an amendment.
We'll get to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll wait on that one.
It gets complicated. But yeah, if you like it and you want to add that amendment, you can. Then the commission would vote on the amendment, the 10-foot setback requirement. And if that passes, then you go back down to the original motion, which is now amended to add that 10-foot setback. But Commissioner Bigelow, if you were the first one to make the motion and you say, I move to approve subject to a 10-foot setback condition, then that's not an amendment. That's your original motion.
Yeah.
And if there's a second, then you can just vote on that, and you do not need to get into the amendment process.
Cool.
So 2 questions on that. So if he did that, what you just mentioned, a lot of times we're reading off of our paperwork, and we're reading, staff, they recommend approval. So we're reading exactly the way we see it, whoever makes that motion for approval. So at that time, instead of making an amendment, we can actually add the conditions out of the gate.
You could just do it right from the
Perfect.
beginning.
And making amendments or changes is better than it dying. The second question is, a lot of times when we're asking for a motion for approval and then getting a second, any chair is looking immediately for a yay or nay. And so I guess just as kind of a reminder to the commissioners at that point, if I say, hey, yay or nay, I guess that's a time to interrupt and say, I'd like to make an amendment, right? Just as a reminder of procedure.
Correct. That they need to speak up. If someone wants to make an amendment before the final vote, they need to say, hey, I move to amend. And then as the chair, you would recognize that, okay, what's your amendment? If there's a second, then the discussion goes to the amendment. If there's no second, again, it dies and you go back to the original vote and either have a discussion or call for the vote on that original item.
If I may. One of the things that I think is really important is it's very confusing, especially when you're up there and you're trying to figure out what's going on. I think the most important thing is just pause and ask the attorney that will be present to walk you through what the next steps are so you understand it, because it'll get very confusing when everybody's talking and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I've sat through council meetings where that's happened and it's really confusing. So I think anybody who serves as chair, just stop for a moment, ask for advice, and they'll walk you through it.
No, thank you. At times it can, especially if you have amendments out there or amendments to amendments, which we'll talk about. Hopefully we don't do amendments to amendments because it gets confusing, but if we do, we can. But sometimes it's helpful, and as the attorneys, we try to pay attention, and sometimes we'll just say, hey, just to be clear, here's what's on the floor. Here's what's being discussed. We're discussing an amendment, not the original motion. And as for the chair, if you have any questions, or sometimes it kind of gets confusing with what's going on and different people are talking about different things, is feel free to talk to us and say, hey, where are we from a procedural standpoint? And we'll say, oh, well, there was a motion and a second. There was a motion to amend, but no second, so there's no amendment, and we're still on the original motion. So feel free to stop if you have any questions, and we'll try to do the same, pay attention, and bring it up to you, interrupt if we want to just make sure everyone's understanding what's being discussed, what's actually on the table right now. Motions to amend the amendment, we can do that as well. So someone moves to amend, and there's a second, and there's a discussion, and then someone can move to amend that amendment. So in the 10-foot setback, Commissioner Bigelow moves to amend to add a 10-foot setback. There's a second, and before you move on to vote on that, another commissioner says, well, I move to amend the amendment. I want to add a 15-foot step back. And so you take a vote on that first one, if there's a second, and then you go back to the amendment, and then you go back down. So that's just the way it works. This is where you can get really confusing, and everyone needs to understand what is being voted on. Is it the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, or are we on the original motion?
And everybody can participate in the amendment. So the person that made that first motion for whatever. And
Correct.
There's a second, and whoever makes an amendment, we can all participate.
Absolutely.
Either agreeing or disagreeing or amending the amendment.
Yep, absolutely. And Robert's rules, you stop at motions to amend the amendment. You don't keep going. If this is it. right? Moving to amend. Otherwise, it gets too confusing. And then I think this is the last slide I've got, but just there's other motions out there that can be used, and there's lots of others, but these are the most common. Postpone to a definite date. So sometimes you need more information. You're running out of time. Maybe you got more important items you need to address. So we're going to postpone this item to a definite date. Sometimes you want to think more about it, but you shouldn't use it to avoid a topic or a vote. But there are a lot of times, and you've probably seen it, where you need more information from staff, from the applicant, and so you move to postpone it to a definite date. So you'll say, hey, the next Redevelopment Commission meeting. Or if staff says, hey, we need 2 months to run this down, then you pick the date 2 months out. You could move to table an item, and that really permanently kills that matter. And then a couple other motions you can do is call the question. So say there's a debate going on and someone moves to call the question. That's saying, all right, enough talking, let's just vote. And so if there's a second to the call the question, then discussion's over and the voting happens. And then the other motion is where someone can call for a point of order. And that's basically saying, hey, Chair, I think there was a procedural deficiency. Let's talk about what's going on right now. I'm not quite sure where we are on this. So you just say, hey, you know, I move point of order. I move to make a point of order. And that's where we kind of stop and everyone reassesses. Where are we in the discussion to make sure everybody understands? Are we talking about an active motion? Was there a second? Okay, what is the motion? Is it a motion to approve with a condition? Okay, everybody hears what we're really talking about. Kind of resets everything to make sure everybody understands where you are in that discussion at that point. And that's it. That's the basics of Robert's Rules.
I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding tabling an issue, because I think in my head I interpret tabling an issue as to we'll talk about it later. So what would be an example of something that we would table that we would say is permanently kills the issue?
Permanently, yeah. It's a good question. Can you think of anything on your agenda? Typically, we don't do that. You would say you'd postpone to a definite date. You could say you could postpone to an uncertain date if staff's like, hey, we're not sure what time. And so that's the one you would use probably most in this role with the Redevelopment Commission.
Would we table with an explanation of why? I mean, and staff works so hard on different items, it's very unlikely. But, you know, if we got to that point up here, I mean, I think that's you know, sad. But would we explain, hey, we want to table, here's why?
Yeah, you could definitely do that. But if the commission is, you know, if the idea is that you've got a pending agenda item and you just don't like it, then just go ahead and disapprove it. Move to disapprove. That's probably the better practice rather than just tabling something and kind of leaving it out there. If the votes are there to not pass it, then you take the vote, and if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. And you don't have the recommendation, that's totally fine. That's within your purview.
If somebody was repetitively coming back with the same thing and just, you know, trying to really push something that wasn't going to work with, you know, anything, is that where we would table it and be like, dude, you've come here 3 times, 4 times, like, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, we've been here every quarter on this.
Yeah.
I think that's probably something you could do. They may still try to come back though, but yeah. Table's not something you do very often, at least in this role with the Redevelopment Commission.
And even on that comment, I think tabling or disapproving something that staff thought they were recommending for approval, it can't happen.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
guess the study session a month prior and having, you know, accessibility to staff. I mean, we would hope that as commissioners, you know, we reach out to staff or citizens and say, hey, what's your concern? What's your, you know, what you know? So I guess that's one as a reminder to us that serve that, you know, I don't want to be up here unprepared. And this is a month prior to a study session, and then coming a month later, and then kind of being, and you know, everyone kind of like not sideswipe, but like confused, like, well, how do we get here? And so it's really nice to know that staff's always available to answer questions, and council, citizens, and each other as commissioners, we can call each other. So maybe you can address that also. I don't think up here is the time to address each other, but public perception is everything. And so if I leaned over and said, hey, Bo, is this the attorney or is this the architect for this project? And I leaned over and I asked them that question. Publicly, that wouldn't look very good. But is there anything that's acceptable up here for us to lean over and ask our neighbor?
No, that's really good points. What you do, obviously, as you know, with the open meeting law, any discussion about any items has to be with your fellow commissioners, as a quorum has to be done in a public meeting. You can't talk to other commissioners outside of this, or at least multiple commissioners. You could talk to one about an item and you're fine, but if that person talks to somebody else who talks to somebody else, you've got the potential for an open meeting law violation. So you want to limit conversations about items coming before the commission, to the public meeting. As far as your appearance, I think that's a point that's right on. If you're sitting there, leaning over talking or sitting there texting during a meeting, it gives the appearance that somebody may question, who are you texting? Are you texting the developer? You're texting a staff member? Are you texting each other and having a conversation about the item outside of the public view? So I think it's really important that when you're in the meetings to A, be attentive, but B, not give the appearance that you're not paying attention.
And with that, if it's a simple question, I think Bo can answer for me. It's probably better just to say, Amanda, could you clarify? Or I could even ask the speaker. I'm trying to think of an example, but there have been times where it would have been easier to lean over, to Ryan Hamilton, and because he probably knew the answer, versus stopping and queuing up the microphone.
No, I think that's a really good point. If a commissioner says, has a question, just say, Chair, I've got a question. What about this? And it's best done in the microphone where everyone can see and not giving the appearance that there's side conversations happening.
The only last question is, even before a meeting has started, I think I've been conscious not to, I might say, hey, Bo, how's it going? How's that how's your project going? So I do try publicly just to not, I might have a one-on-one conversation, but typically it's non-related. But you probably advise the same thing before the meeting started or even after the meeting started, just to not be more than 3 people together.
Yeah, I think that's really good practice to have, even out in public. If you all go to lunch together, that doesn't look good, right? You got a potential quorum, and people may think you're talking about items even if you're not. So it's just something to be very careful about. Any other questions?
Casey, if you're still online, do you have any additional questions?
So I actually had a question.
Thank you.
Yes, I had a question about the amendment to the amendment, and I think if I heard you correctly, you said that one amendment could be voted on, but it may nullify the amendment that's added.
So if you've got a motion to amend that's been seconded, then that's going to be the item that's being discussed. And if that amendment passes, then it modifies the underlying motion. Now, which makes really the original motion is now really becomes the motion to amend. And then you re-vote on that original motion, which has now been amended to whatever passed. Does that make sense?
But so then does it work the other way as well, that if it's voted down, then the rest of it's voted down?
No, if the amendment is voted down, so motion to amend to add the 10-foot setback, and there's a second, and that dies, 3 of the 5 say no, then you go back to the original motion, which is motion to approve, as recommended by staff. So then you got to re-vote on that, and that motion doesn't die. That motion's still sitting there. Just that original motion now stays the same, and you vote on the original motion.
Okay.
Could someone make a new amendment? So the 10-foot dies. Okay, I make a new amendment, 5-foot setback.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if that gets seconded, then you have a new amendment. That gets discussed. If it passes, then you go back to the original vote. And that's the one step I think that gets missed sometimes is a motion to amend passes and then people want to move on. But reality is you still have the pending underlying motion that has to get voted on that's now been modified.
I've got an example for us to walk through. I've got an example for us to walk through in my presentation so we can kind of test it out and see how that all works. Jocelyn, if you could do me a favor and just pull up my presentation.
Does Casey have anything else he wanted
Oh
to
yeah,
add?
I'm sorry. Casey.
No, that's fine. I appreciate the input. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to start with the, just really quickly, why we're here with the redevelopment area. So the Heritage District is 0.3 square miles, and it is a designated redevelopment area through the Arizona Revised Statutes. And in order to get to that point, we had to prove the finding of necessity by our local governing body, which is our council, that the area necessitated slum and blight clearance. And so that happened in 1989. And I point out these other two. There's a number of statutes within Title 36, particularly around slum and blight clearance, that I highly suggest you all look at. But the slum and blight clearance does allow for us to develop a redevelopment commission. I can share with you that at least from my counterparts in redevelopment, it's very unique that we have our own. Many of the cities around us use their planning commission as their redevelopment commission. So, and it's the design review board essentially that oversees, the slum clearance in this area. And of course, the ARS also requires that we prepare and council approves a redevelopment plan. And the purpose of that is to help guide us to continue clearing the area of slum and blight and to encourage redevelopment. So I just wanted to kind of put that framework in there in the beginning of the.
Can I just jump in real quick? The definitions, if you were to look in Title 36 here, and look at, I think everybody, when they hear slum and blight, they have maybe a perception in their mind of an area. But if you look at what a slum area is actually defined as, or a blighted area, it's not really, I think, what most people think of. So a slum area is an area where there's a predominance of buildings or improvements, whether residential or non-residential. Public health, safety, or welfare is threatened because of any of the following: dilapidated, deteriorated, aging, obsolescent buildings, inadequate provision of ventilation, overcrowding, existence of conditions that endanger life. And then it also talks about the inadequacy of the public facilities, so street layouts. That's getting into the blighted areas. It's an area other than a slum area where municipal growth and provision of housing is substantially retarded because of a dominance of defective, inadequate street layout, faulty lot layout, relation to size, adequacy, accessibility, unsanitary, unsafe conditions, deterioration of site, diversity of ownership, defective conditions of title, and a number of other things. So that's why, you think downtown Gilbert, no one's going to say slum or blight, but there may still be some of these other conditions, and that's why it's a redevelopment area. You look at what's happening in the Northwest as well. A lot of those properties, were developed many, many years ago and just don't work for what's needed today. And so they do fall under the definition of a blighted area, even though we think of blight and we think of just complete vacancy and trashed out areas. The statute has a different definition for that.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions about that before we move on? Okay. So you all receive an agenda packet. And the reason I put this up here is just, the most important thing that you can do is review that packet. Chairman Shaka already stated, if you have questions, call staff. We're here to answer questions. And certainly you have the opportunity to discuss the item with another commissioner. I'm always available for conversations as well as your staff liaison, and certainly Councilmember Tilke as the council liaison. So you've got a number of people to reach out to, including the staff who their name, number, and email is always at the top of the packet. So please review that before the meeting and ensure that if you have questions, you reach out. Before we get into the motions, though, we will, we have study sessions, and the real purpose of those is to ask a lot of questions and really dig into the items. So that's a really good opportunity if you have questions at that time to really ask as much as you possibly can and really get to know the item before it comes before for public hearing. So I just gave, and of course, Councilmember Tilke, if you have anything you want to jump in on, please do.
All right. So I was wondering, as council members, we have the little vote button and it shows up there. So it's very easy when it's time to vote. The mayor tells us to vote, we hit a button. But I know it seems a little awkward when you have 5 members and it's a voice vote, sometimes determining what the vote was if it's not unanimous. And so I'm going to look at Chris and Amanda. Just on protocol, is it good for the chair to do a roll call vote and then state what the final vote is? Is that helpful? Or I'm just trying to make it easier for you all.
Personally, I think that would be helpful. You see the voice votes sometimes, and I don't know who's voting yes or no. And for the minute taker, it's important to know, they have to note who voted aye, who voted nay. So for me, I think that's a really good practice, is to do, if you're going to do a voice vote, then do a roll call or have people raise their hands, but then make note that, these 3 commissioners voted yes, and these 3 voted no. Or even if you just it's a 3-2 vote and you just note who votes no, then that's enough for the note taker to be able to say these 2 are no. Obviously, everybody else was yes. To me, I think it's a lot easier to do something like that, because when you get some ayes and nays and you don't even know who's voting what, it's really difficult for the minute taker to do that.
I'm happy to help with that too at any point. I'll be keeping notes. So, okay, so I just want to look
I
ahead.
have one question, because you were talking about study session and your availability and our opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. And it's not like a tipping of the hands, but if we have concerns, I mean, you can hear it in our questions. But yet it's not the time to say, well, if this comes forward this way, I'm going to vote no against it. It's really time to explore and say, hey, is this height too high? Or is this too much? Or, I mean, I think it's the right time to ask those kind of questions that might be hard for staff, and staff has to come back and answer those. I guess, are the answers always provided at the following time of vote, a month later at the next commission meeting? Or does staff have the opportunity to call us individually and say, hey, you raised these questions and we met with the applicant, here's where we're at, and not looking for our yes or no or approval, but really kind of, I guess, getting a temperature or pulse on where we're at now, so we're not going to come in and still maybe not be satisfied with where we're at.
Chairman Shaka, I believe that staff certainly can circle back, and I can't speak for planning, but I'm quite certain that they do circle back on those questions afterwards. I think the real benefit to hearing the dialogue at the dais, particularly as the applicant, if they're hearing questions about height or setbacks or step backs or landscaping, they're really going to look at their project and say, what are the concerns, and start reaching out to you all, hopefully through staff, but reaching out to you to better understand, where does that uncomfortability lie in the conversation, so that they can either modify their design or, better explain the intent of a height, for example, or a step back that they're using. But staff certainly will circle back. If there's questions at the dais that they can't answer at that time when they're at the podium, they'll certainly call back.
And you make a good point that at a study session, the item is not before, you're having a discussion, there's no legal vote that's going to be taken, that'll be at a subsequent meeting. So you should not say, I support this, I don't support this, but you absolutely can be very critical of, or any questions, bring it up, ask the applicant, ask the developer, ask staff.
Excuse me.
Sometimes they'll be able to answer it, sometimes not. And when you get to the subsequent meeting where there actually will be, it's agendized for the vote, sometimes they'll address it and sometimes they won't. And then as a commissioner, you'll have to decide, well, they didn't have the setback I want. Do I support this or not? And if your answer is no, that's fine. Each of you are individuals. You're appointed because of your background and experience, and you don't have to vote. Just because staff recommends something does not mean that you have to vote for it just because. You're individual, and that's part of the point of Robert's rules is, give everyone a fair vote, and you're here for a reason because the town council values each one of your opinions.
Great.
So a quick question. So you said something about not saying I would approve this or not approve it, but is it appropriate to to express what we like about. Like, I really like this project. I like what I see. This is great so far. That was one comment. And the second comment is there probably have been times, and before I started serving, where maybe study session, we didn't have citizens in the room or someone opposed or for. And then when it came time for a vote, we had a larger audience or people that were really here being vocal and then could sway the commissioners. And to your point, we all have a voice, so we can vote no or against something. So just two comments, really.
Yeah, and to your first point, yeah, it's absolutely say, hey, I really like this. I like the design. I like that. Totally appropriate. But what you don't want to do is, just say, hey, I'm going to support this. That conversation, that statement's saved for the day where there's an actual item in front of you to vote on.
Did you have a question? I thought you were reaching for.
Yes, I did. Thank you for reminding me, actually. So, Amanda, you had mentioned the possibility for maybe someone to reach out to us directly about clarifying something, and then you said hopefully they do it through staff. What would be the protocol if someone reaches out to us personally?
It's my understanding that if an applicant reaches out to the commissioners, that the commissioners are able to speak directly to the applicant.
That's correct. The best practice would be if, say, there's an applicant that talks to you and says, hey, you had some questions about this in the study session. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're thinking. Is at the next commission meeting where you're actually going to vote on that, just make a statement that, hey, I spoke with the applicant about this item. That's all you need to say. You don't have to get much into it, but it's just being transparent and letting people know that, hey, you had a conversation outside of the public meeting, which is appropriate because you're not having the open meeting law applies to conversations among the commissioners, not among staff or citizens. It's the same thing if a resident in downtown has a question for you or they're concerned, they can reach out to you and it's totally appropriate to talk to them. You just say, hey, I spoke with these 3 residents and they had some concerns. And then you move on and that's totally fine.
And quick question, I don't know why it came up, but if I hired a zoning attorney about 5 years ago, and then I see him sitting in the audience, he's representing his client, but our services had already ended, 5 years prior, and here he is sitting in the audience representing a client. Do I need to recuse myself?
No, you wouldn't unless you feel like you cannot be impartial because that was your zoning attorney 5 years earlier. So if you feel like you can't be impartial with the vote, then you would just say, hey, I've got that ethical code that I'll send. It talks about a personal interest and just say, hey, I cannot be impartial because I have a relationship, whether it's a zoning attorney or whether it's a friend of yours, someone that's coming before that you know really well. And if you feel like you can't be impartial, then you should recuse yourself. But if you can be, then you go ahead and it's totally appropriate to participate.
Great. Casey, any questions before we get into a couple mock motions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So this is my made-up design review, DR 111111. Essentially, you would have heard at this point, you would have heard a study session. You would be familiarized with the item. And in this case, it's now coming before you, a public hearing. And the public hearing order is actually from our land development code. So this is how the proceeding happened. So there's an introduction of the item from the chair. They open the public hearing. Staff then gives their report. The applicant has an opportunity to give a presentation at that point. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then it's open to public testimony. So this is where the public has their opportunity to speak on the item. And then from there, the applicant can then return and provide a response to the public comment. At this time, throughout this, you as commissioners are able to ask questions of staff during their staff report, and certainly questions of the applicant, but not of the public. Is that correct? Yeah, but not of the public. And so then you've got public testimony, applicant responds to that, and then if there's further questions you may have that have arisen from the public testimony and the applicant response, and staff can be called up to clarify any of those last minute questions. That then allows you to discuss the item at that point. before you move into a motion.
Quick question is, not all discussion is had prior to a motion and a second, right? There are times where someone makes a motion and another commissioner has follow-up questions. Is that okay?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
So a lot of times when there's a motion and there's a second, it's voted on quite quickly. But I have seen, I think, in other council meetings where there's a motion made and before a second is made, there's additional questions that commissioners or council members may have. I mean, I'm not saying inappropriate, but it has happened. I didn't know if that's the wrong process of order.
It does happen. It's not the best practice, but it does happen where, people have sat down and then a council member or a commissioner wants to bring somebody back up to ask a follow-up question. The better practice is do that when they're there, before there's a pending motion, because really when there's a pending motion and there's a second, then it should be just discussion about the dais. But there are times where a commission member or a council member says, hey, I've got a follow-up, I want to ask the staff member or the applicant, and they'll do that. But the better practice is to get those questions done beforehand. And really it's up to the chair to allow it at the end of the day.
I was going to mention that, Peter. I feel like you do a great job before you ask for a motion. You just look at us and ask, hey, do any of you have any other questions or comments? And so, anyways,
All
I
right,
feel
thank
like we haven't had that issue because you do that.
All right, cool.
Yeah, and it's really helpful because then everyone knows when you've got a motion, you've got a second, now you've got a conversation. You don't worry about anybody else here. The conversation is now amongst yourselves, and then you take the vote.
And so before your motion, you're also going to close the public hearing, and that then allows you to discuss your motion as it comes forth without the public's discussion of that motion. And so I put up a mock motion, and I've got both in favor of, in support of, and not in support of. So
Just one quick comment for Attorney Chris, that you said discussion. So even though we may not call someone back up or ask staff for additional questions, I like what you just said. We can have conversations. So while there's a motion on the table, we can have some dialogue after there's a motion before we receive a second. This is how I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling. Or thinking. So I don't sometimes know that we don't really practice that, but we can have dialogue even after there's a motion. Although I'm thinking through questions prior to motion, you prefer that dialogue coming out earlier, but it has happened as far as conversation through the microphone up here.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's appropriate. The council does that a lot once there's a motion and a second. The mayor will typically give every council member an opportunity to speak, and sometimes they won't say a word, or other times they'll say, hey, I'm going to support this, and here's why. It's an opportunity for the commission members, if you want, to state why you're for or why you're against an item. Or some council members do that more than others, and others won't say why, and that's fine. They just take the vote. That's appropriate as well.
I will tell you from the applicants, it's helpful for them to hear, particularly in zoning cases where this governing body is making a recommendation to the next governing body. So, for example, in a rezone, you would make that recommendation in favor or not in favor of to Planning Commission. Planning Commission then makes their recommendation to Town Council, and Town Council has the ultimate decision. But what's helpful to the applicant, it is helpful to the applicant to hear if you are comfortable giving your perspective, because it helps them rethink, what they may need to either change on their design or their approach and their conversation, just to really better help them through that process.
I have a question.
Jump on in.
In regards to interaction with the public, what does that look like? Are we mostly there to just take comments? Can you define that for us?
Commissioner Kendall, in a public hearing, we have allowed, we allow the public to come up and speak. They typically get about 3 minutes. We have allowed extensions of that at the discretion of the chair, particularly on items where people have reached out beforehand. It's really the public's opportunity to share their perspective and not for the commissioners to interact with or ask further questions of the public or to direct I guess, like next steps or tasks based on the public's input.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it's totally appropriate if, you know, a citizen comes up and they have a concern to call the applicant up and say, well, what do you think about this? You know, citizens say this, how would you address that? Have you thought about that? Have they spoke with you about that? That's appropriate to find out, you know, if you have a concern about what they're saying, is to follow with the applicant and bring that up at that moment.
But that is only, go ahead.
Well, so is it if let's say a developer or an architect or something like that has already given their presentation, they've answered questions, can we call them back up or recall them to ask further questions?
Yes, Commissioner Kendall, that's exactly correct. So in the process, the applicant can provide a presentation, the public can give testimony, and that's where you could then call the applicant back up and ask, you know, hey, I heard Amanda was really concerned about, you know, the noise, possibility of noise. Did you have that conversation with her? And what are some of the items that you're going to put in place to mitigate that? That's a very valid question and way to handle that.
And just for clarification, these are items on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda, then we just like say, thank you, staff will get back to you, and it's done.
Correct. Do you do communications
We do,
from citizens?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so if it's an item at the beginning, it's a communication from citizens, that's a one-way conversation. And under the rules, open meeting law, and the reason is because if citizen Chris gets up and I want to talk about, you know, some new project in the Heritage District that's not on the agenda, the commission can't talk about that item because it's not agendized. So I can get up and I can take my 3 minutes and talk about it, but you can't have a conversation, you can't engage, and you certainly can't talk among yourselves. What you could say is, if it's something that you're concerned about, say, hey, let's get this on the next agenda, and then we can have a discussion. But it's really a one-way conversation with citizens. You can respond to criticism, but that's really about what you're limited to do. You can give direction to staff. Hey, you know, the citizen's concerned about something. Amanda, could you follow up with them about it? That's totally appropriate. But the communication from citizens is really a one-way conversations because the item's not agendized that they're talking about. It's different than the public hearing where they get up and they're talking about the project that you're voting on, and that's where you can, you know, take the comment and then ask the applicant or ask staff, hey, have you thought about this? What have you done about this?
Commissioner Kendall, I've asked staff before a meeting if I could call a citizen up before and after a particular agenda item, and staff said, that's fine, if you want to do it, even though it doesn't say so on our agenda. And I guess I'd like to extend the same courtesy to the commissioners. If you feel there's someone that has reached out to you directly, that maybe on the agenda they're speaking after the staff is going to speak, and you think it's better they speak before or both, I think it's appropriate to say, you know, through the chair, I'd like to call any additional citizens to come forward. I think that's very helpful. If people have taken their time to come here and participate. So I just sometimes the order, it's helpful for citizen hears a staff explanation and they come back up afterwards. I think it's helpful.
And that would probably be good just to give you a heads up and let you know that it's going on before the meeting, right?
If possible, but I've noticed, you know, and you can try to look in the audience, but, you know, if citizens go first on an agenda item and then staff presents on it, and then maybe there's something that wasn't hit or there's something that wasn't touched on that maybe you feel like that citizen might know or can bring forward to the microphone, and you can tell either by, you know, they're not waving in the audience, but you feel like you kind of know their position wasn't properly addressed in their first 3 minutes. Then I think it's okay to say, Chair, could we bring so-and-so back forward, or can we bring a citizen? I think it's okay as long as I don't get flagged down by the city attorney. But because there is an agenda that we follow, but you know, we're here to serve the public, and so if there's public here that missed something, I think it's okay if the order is conducted in a timely manner.
No, I totally agree with that. As the chair controls the meeting, and you've got the discretion to do something like that. It's absolutely correct.
Any other questions? I know it's a lot to serve in this position, and you guys just, I'm in awe of everything our boards and commissions and our council do. Okay, so let's just act like I've given you this presentation. We get through this, and my recommended motion. So that's what you'll see on your agenda packet. You'll have what staff is recommending, and the recommended motion says recommend that you move to approve the findings and approve DR 111111 New Heritage District building. So at that point, okay, hang on. We're going to try that. Okay, so Mr. Chairman, if you would ask for a motion, and let's have Commissioner Meehan walk through a move to approve.
And quick question too, like I typically will not, as a commissioner, I've always wanted to give, a motion to approve or a second, but as a chair, I don't care to. Like I can, but I don't care to. I think it's, I'm teeing it up for somebody else to grab the baton. So, but attorney question, I mean, I can make a motion to approve.
Yes,
And
absolutely. There are some bodies, some public bodies where the chair, the mayor, the commissioner only has only votes in the case of a tie, but we're not set up like that from the town council on down. And so the chair, the mayor has a vote, one of 5, one of 7, and it's totally appropriate to make a motion. But I understand that, hey, typically you want to defer to a different commissioner, but if no one's doing it, you absolutely have the right to do that, or a second as well.
thank you. So there's a motion on the table. I'm looking for a motion to approve the findings and approve DR 11-111 New Heritage District building.
So in this case, you would just ask for a motion.
Good.
You don't have to even mention approve or deny at this point, because you may have another commissioner that says, well, I move to deny the findings and deny DR 111111. I didn't think that through when I put those numbers in there, but so you've had your discussion, you've gone through each commissioner, they've all had an opportunity to discuss the project, and then, Mr. Chairman, it would just be you to say, I'm looking for a motion.
Perfect.
What that does is it gets the business on the table for you guys to, continue to discuss and move the item along. So in this case, we'll have Commissioner Meehan make the motion for approval.
So let me re-ask, that way I know. So I'm looking for a motion for DR 11-111.
Perfect.
Can I ask a question first? No.
Of course, yes, yep.
Since we had talked about doing a roll call, does that mean when I, in this mock move to approve this motion, do I state my name or no?
Nope, at this time. So you just say, Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the findings and approve DR 111111 New Heritage District building. So you'll just essentially read, if you're following the recommended motion, you'd read the recommended motion that staff has listed.
Okay. Then I move to approve the findings and approve DR 11-1111 New Heritage District building.
And at this time, we would need a second.
I will second that motion.
Okay, and all right, here's where we hit a T, right? So now we have an amendment, though, right? We don't have to vote yet. So Chairman Shaka, you say, you know what, I heard this conversation about the step back. We really didn't address that. So what I heard was that we wanted to add a 10-foot step back at that 3rd floor as a condition of approval. So at this point, I would like to move, sorry, I'm trying to navigate 2 computer screens. Move to amend the original motion by adding a 10-foot step back at the 3rd floor as a condition of approval. At that time, we would need a second. So you wanted to give it a try?
Yeah, so we have a second on the floor. Are there any additional comments or questions before I look for a vote? And if not, I think that we need to make an amendment to the motion, adding a 10-foot step back to the motion that's on the table, DR 11-111.
Now, at this time, you would need a second. So if whenever you want a second.
We made the original. Can we second the amendment?
Yep.
Okay. I move to second the how do I phrase that?
Just second the amendment would be fine.
Second the
Yeah.
amendment to the motion?
And Commissioner Meehan, even if you provide the second, that doesn't mean you have to vote for the amendment. You certainly can, but you're not obligated to.
Okay. Okay, so then I move to, no, that's not right. I second the motion.
To amend the original
To amend
motion.
the original
Perfect.
motion.
Perfect. I know it gets complicated when you get into amendments, and I have yet to sit through this many amendments, but we're going to do one more. Okay, so let's say we've got the second, the amend, and now we've got, wait a minute, Commissioner Bigelow heard, I heard that, you said 10 foot, but really what we were talking about was 20 foot. When you're amending an amendment, you can only amend the item on the table. So, for example, Commissioner Bigelow, you can say, well, I want to amend the amendment by adding trees. You can only amend what's on the table. And in this case, what's on the table is the setback. So what you would say is, I would like to amend the amendment by moving to strike the 10-foot setback and insert, or by moving to strike 10 foot and insert 20 foot. Then you'd need a second.
Chair, I would like to amend the amendment and move to strike the 10-foot setback and insert a 20-foot setback.
Do we have a second to Commissioner Bigelow's amendment to the amendment?
Come on.
I
Second the amendment
second
to
the
the amendment.
amendment to the amendment.
Great.
Okay.
At this time, I'd like to do a roll call vote,
Yes.
or just say, at this time, I'd like to take a vote.
Yep.
Instead of saying all in favor, say yay, and not in favor, say nay. Say this time I'll take a vote. Do I vote last? Do I call myself last?
Probably best. Yeah, you could just go down the line and ask everyone what their vote is.
So Commissioner Kendall, are you clear on the motion and the two amendments on the table for approval?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
How do you cast your vote?
Yay.
Thank you. Commissioner Bigelow.
Yay.
Commissioner Mahan.
Yay.
Then I'll take a vote. I vote nay. So we have three yays and one nay. So the motion DR 111-111 with two amendments, striking
Wait.
no?
Nope, just the amendment to the amendment.
Oh, we have to go back still.
Now you have to go back.
You have to
So-
go back to the First Amendment
Wow,
now.
okay.
So now the First Amendment, instead of 10, is 20 since it passed.
Okay.
Now you have to vote on that First Amendment to add that 10-foot step back.
Okay. So for the record, the amendment for 20-foot setback or step back does carry forward. So now I need to take a vote for the 10-foot step back.
Well, the 20-foot, because the 10-foot is now 20-foot.
Right.
Because the 20-foot amendment amended the 10-foot amendment.
Is gone.
Yes.
So now I'm looking for a motion for the original, a vote for the original motion.
For the original amendment,
Okay?
because the original amendment was a 10-foot. The amendment to the amendment was 20. Since that 20 passed, it now replaces the 10 on the amendment. So now you have to vote on the amendment. And if that passes, then you vote on the motion as amended. If it doesn't pass, then you get your original motion with no step back at all.
And why wouldn't the 20-foot amendment go ahead and just cancel out the 10-foot amendment?
It effectively does, but you do just from a Robert's Rules procedural order, that's the way it goes.
And if I just voted nay against the 20-foot, I can now vote yay for the 10-foot.
You can now vote, well, the 10-foot's now gone because the 10-foot's been amended by the amendment to the amended. Does that make sense?
If it's gone, what are we voting on for that First Amendment?
The First Amendment, you're now voting on a 20-foot step back.
Okay.
Because
Okay, so-
that's what passed on the amendment to the amendment.
So just to clarify, when he asked for our votes, was I voting on the 10 or the 20?
You were voting on the amendment to the amendment, which is the 20.
The 20,
Striking the
okay.
10 and inserting 20.
Okay.
And now
To
that
consider
passed,
20.
To consider 20, yes.
Yeah.
And now that passed, now the amendment before the commission is the 20-foot step back. That's the next vote. And if you voted no on the amendment to the amendment, you can vote yes on the amendment.
Yeah,
Even though
'cause-
you voted no on the 20, you're like, well, if your decision is 20 is better than nothing, I would rather have 10. That's why I voted no on the amendment to the amendment. But I'd rather have 20 than nothing. Then you can vote yes on the amendment that's now substituted with 20, or you can vote no.
We're hoping that we,
We
I
don't have
haven't
to
got
get
it,
into
I
this.
haven't, I've yet to be through an amendment to an amendment, but if you want to go ahead, so basically you are now asking to move to amend the, move to approve the amendment by adding a 20-foot step back at the third floor as a condition of approval.
So now I'm looking for a vote to approve the 20-foot step back, because we already I'm just clarifying, I'm talking now. So we already basically voted yay that we're nixing the 10, and now we're looking for a yes or no for the 20.
Correct.
So looking to get a vote for the First Amendment, I'm looking for your votes for DR 11-111 for the amendment for a 20-foot step back. So at this time, I'll look to Commissioner Bigelow. Yes or no, yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay. Commissioner Kendall,
Yay.
Commissioner Mahan,
Yay.
and myself, I also vote yay. So we have a unanimous decision and the motion carries forward.
Great, and now you have to go back to the original motion with the condition of
Well,
approval.
yeah, so now you have the original motion that's now been amended with the 20-foot requirement.
And so this is what it would read. You'd say something to the effect of, I move to approve the findings and approve with condition of approval for a 20-foot step back at the third floor for DR 111111, New Heritage District Building.
So the final order of business on this motion is I move to approve the findings I move to approve the findings and approve the conditions of approval for a 20-foot setback at the third floor DR 11-111 New Heritage District Building. Commissioner Bigelow, how do you cast your vote?
Oh, wait, you'll need a second.
Oh, I'm looking for a second.
I second the findings and approve. I second to move to approve the findings and approve the conditions of the approval of the 20-foot setback at the third floor DR 111111 in the New Heritage District Building.
Thank you. We have a second on the floor. At this time, I will do a roll call vote. Commissioner Mahan, how do you vote?
Yay.
Commissioner Kendall,
Yay.
Commissioner Bigelow,
Yay.
and myself, I vote yay as well. The motion carries forward.
Great. So we don't need to do this if we're going to do roll call vote, and I do think that roll call vote will help us through that process.
And just as a reminder, a way to get around having to do motions to amend and amend, if Commissioner Bigelow, if you want 20 feet, then you make the original motion. I move to approve DR subject to a 20-foot. You could put the original motion on the floor as what you want rather than having to go through that. Now, if someone wants 10, then they can move to amend the 20 to 10, and you're in that process. But a lot of times you'll see that just the motion that's being made is adding the condition right at the beginning. And usually it's because the conversation has talked about a condition, conversation with the applicant, maybe with the residents, and kind of the consensus maybe is to add a condition. You'll just do it straight up.
Staff will usually have conditions also in their report. So if there are items that they've heard that, you've expressed concerns about in study session or ones that they've heard from the citizens, we usually have those in our back pocket too to help be able to put those conditions of approval on the table.
We didn't role play it, but in the event that the amendments died, we have a live, we still have the original motion. So we need to go
Correct.
back there. So,
Yep.
yeah.
That's exactly correct. So the other question is, so what happens if staff's recommendation is to move to approve the findings, and what we hear is that majority here is not an approval of it, or of this project, New Heritage District Building? Certainly, when Mr. Chairman asks for a motion, one of you can say, we move that the commission deny approval of that DR 111111. So I just wanted to share that a motion doesn't always have to be approval. It can be denial as well. So we just wanted to make that clear. I mean, certainly our hope is that you're having conversations with the applicants and staff to help better understand the project before you get to that point. But
And not to put anybody on the spot, but would it be inappropriate to say, thank you for your motion to disapprove staff's recommendation? Can you explain more? Or they don't have to, right?
you don't have to. No, they don't have to at all. I mean, they could be recommending denial of approval and end up voting yay for it once the conversation happens. Really what happens is once that motion and a second is made, additional conversation, it means that the business is on the table. So additional conversation can happen around that motion.
And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but maybe somebody voted a certain way and they don't want to talk about it. I mean, so would you recommend me not asking that question? Like, hey, why did you make this motion? Or is it the wrong time?
Do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know legally, but I feel like if someone's going to vote yes or no, and it's an open thing and we're here representing the public, he should have the right to ask us and we should explain whether it is, for or against the project personally, but legally.
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, you don't have to, but I totally agree, Commissioner Bigelow. It's the best practice, right? You're public officials, you're appointed by the council because of your background, your experience, and your opinion matters. And if you're saying no or yes or something, I think it's really helpful for the applicant, for staff, for the residents to understand why. You're not required to, but I agree it's a good practice to do.
Great. Any questions? How did the mock? I know the amendments and the amendment to the amendment gets confusing, and we'll certainly be able to keep us on track there. But are we clear about just how to put a motion on the table, what that ultimately means? What happens, again, when you can second a motion and not be voting in favor of it. It's really, the idea is to get it on the table for additional discussion and for that vote.
And I think Councilmember Tilkey's suggestion of a roll call vote it's helpful. It's helpful. So that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Chris, once the motion's been made, if somebody wants to postpone the discussion because you wanted more information, is that when you do it? Normally when you want to do it before you do the final vote?
Correct, yeah. So if you need more information or the majority of the commission says, you know what, we just need some more follow-up, we need some questions answered, then there can be a motion to postpone. Even though there's a pending motion out there, a pending motion to approve or deny in a second, there could be, hey, I moved to postpone. It looks like we need some more information from staff or from the applicant, and then postpone to a date certain, and that's when you would do that. But once the final vote happens, then it's approved or denied. So if you do want to postpone, you've got to do it before the final vote.
And is it always that, I guess, black and white? I guess the question is, just reflecting back on our last vote, if staff is making a recommendation for 63 feet to approve or disapprove, 63 feet, could someone say, for example, you said, Attorney Chris, that you go ahead, if you want to make an amendment to that, go ahead and do that right in the motion. So I make a motion to approve 63 feet with the condition that it's 57 feet. Would that be inappropriate? I mean, that's the whole ask, is the height, total height, right? So would that be an inappropriate, immediate amendment right out of the gates to a motion to approve?
No, you can move to approve with that condition that I move to approve this item, but instead of 63 at 57, that's your condition. And then if you get a second, then that's what's on the floor. And if someone wants to move to amend it to lower it or make it higher, they can certainly do that. But it'd be appropriate to add any condition on the original motion.
Your brain's hurting yet from all of these
No,
amendments
this is
and
good. This is
motions?
good to review it and just kind of know, and it's really good.
Okay, our next part of this is just, I wanted to walk through our town document. So is there anything else on Robert's Rules of Orders or on motioning that you guys, any additional questions? Commissioner Kendall, any questions that you may have?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start with our general plan. So this is really the community's long-range guide, and this guides, the physical, economic, and social development and decisions for the next 20 plus years in Gilbert. The general plan contains a vision statement, maps, goals, policies, implementation strategies. All of these items really address growth, housing, economic development, transportation, environment, parks and open spaces, community design, and preservation and conservation. So there's a lot that goes into a general plan. Certainly, there are state legal requirements that have to be met. I think what the area that you all will probably use the most within the general plan is the land use framework. And that really provides the zoning categories across Gilbert. So this is one of the elements of the general plan, but one that I think as a commissioner, as a commissioner, you may reach out to staff about have questions on. Projects can seek general plan amendments. So if it's in the district, it would, if there's a general plan amendment, it would have to go through approval denial. So if it's a zoning change, it would go approval denial, recommendation to approve or deny. That would go to Planning Commission. Planning Commission then would make their recommendation, and then council then makes theirs. And then at that point, that's when the general plan could be amended from a zoning category. So again, this is kind of, our guiding document. Then we also have our land development code. Staff is currently working on updating the land development code, but this really establishes land use classifications, creates zoning districts, establishes regulations, prohibitions, restrictions on land use and development, regulates height and the bulk of buildings and structures, regulates lot occupancy, size of yards, open spaces. It's really the standards for the town. And certainly there are also opportunities to seek variances to these standards. A variance similar to an amendment within zoning would have to come to Redevelopment Commission if it's in the Heritage District. And again, you're recommending approval or denial, and that would follow that same process of going to Planning Commission and then Town Council.
I have a question. If we recommend to deny, can it then be reworked and represented then?
So Commissioner Kendall, what would happen is if you recommend to deny a variance, it would still go to Planning Commission. And Planning Commission will make their recommendation. So council, when they make the final decision, would have both recommendations before them. And that helps inform, their ultimate decision. Now, if you recommend to deny and the applicant says, I'm really concerned about moving this forward with that denial, they can stop the process and go back to the drawing boards themselves. But it's really at the decision of the applicant if they want to continue moving it forward or if they would like to stop at that point and rework or see if they can work within the confines of the land development code.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just if you're curious, about a variance. So I'm sorry, it's getting cold up here, so I'm at that shivering point, so my teeth are chattering. So the variance really provides a mechanism for relief from, the application of the zoning code. So this could be anything from, the height, the distance between structures, setbacks, step backs, open space requirements. There's a multitude of reasons that an applicant may seek a variance, and it's really at the. I think what we're looking for from the commissioners is to really understand what that need is and why they're asking for that variance, and to see then does it fit within the character of the Heritage District and within what we're trying to achieve in the district. So you've got couple of guiding documents. The first is the redevelopment plan. The very first one was established in 1991, and our most recent one was adopted in 2018. this is really the framework for how we, in the beginning, we talked about those findings of necessity. What are the areas that are complicating, this area from a development standpoint, and maybe making it more challenging to redevelop or to develop in general. And so the redevelopment plan's purpose is to help guide what we will do over the next, for us, we've done this in essentially 10-year blocks, but guide how do we start to eliminate some of those obstacles to allow for development. Certainly, there are a number of requirements in the Arizona revised statutes that have to be in our redevelopment plan, so we ensure that we meet those as well. But again, it's meant to really be that guiding document. Ours has a number of chapters, the introduction, which kind of sets the stage for the document, the vision, so what we're trying to achieve, what's the character of the Heritage District, the master plan, which I'll talk about in a minute, implementation, so how, from a staff perspective, how do we begin to implement this? What are the various funding sources we can seek? Who has the roles and responsibilities of assisting in growing and redeveloping this area, the requirements, and then certainly there is an appendix with all of the public outreach, any kind of studies that have been done to support this. It's quite a large appendices. But what makes this unique to our other redevelopment plans really is the master plan. So the town owns 56% of the non-residential land in downtown. And so as part of our redevelopment plan, we also asked for a master plan that looked at what does this growth look like overall in the Heritage District? What growth can be sustained in the various categories from office, multifamily, retail, hotel? What does that mean, with parking? How will that affect our parking count? And really start to look at, what are the critical aspects of developing out these parcels that the town owns? And through that, there was a fundamental concept that was created. These projects are included in our capital improvement projects. There are likely ones that you will see as they come back for design review, but they are, because they're capital improvement projects, or ones that private developers are leading in certain circumstances. They are either staff or developer driven. And so they're not driven. The real object of the Redevelopment Commission is to provide that design review, not to act as the commission that brings these projects forth. Does that make sense? Okay, I just wanted to make that clarification. So for example, the Commons Park, you guys will definitely see that as that 9.1 acre project comes in for their design review. And of course, like the other projects, any of these that end up being funded by the town, those ones you would also see. So you'll be able to weigh in on them as they come forth. I think where we've gotten a lot of questions recently is in this, there's an area that talks about recommended regulatory updates. And so there's a section that talks about height, about arcades. These were recommendations that were made as part of the redevelopment plan, but it's really important to highlight this top paragraph because it says these proposed regulatory requirements are meant to serve as recommendations for updates to the design guidelines, the land development code, and the general plan. The recommendations will be further vetted and will return to council for approval, and any future determinations or modifications will be updated in the redevelopment plan. So I know we've had a lot of people point to this section and say, well, this is gospel. And it's very clear that we are still vetting a lot of those recommendations as staff, particularly as we're bringing forth some of these fundamental concept projects. I can share, like, for example, the Vaughn ventilator. We're really looking at the arcades. It's one of the area that it talks about for arcades, and the reason that the redevelopment plan was suggesting arcades along Vaughn ventilator is really from a shading perspective, particularly as we want additional retail. But the way that the land is already starting to build out, we have buildings on there that don't have arcades, and we have ones that are going to be coming forth for design review fairly soon that also do not. So we're looking at, if we have, these blocks that don't have arcades, does it make sense to have an arcade requirement along that entire block? Or does it make more sense for us to really hone in on the various types of requirement for shades, whether it's trees, awnings, canopies, and arcades, and not just require solely arcades, just looking at how it's starting to build. And I think that was really why they were meant to be proposed requirements as these areas continue to develop. But I know I've gotten a few questions on that, so I just wanted to put that in there. And if you guys have questions you want to ask about it in this, we can. The other one that we've had questions about was the design guidelines modified some of the street sections, and within the redevelopment plan, it clearly calls out again circulation improvements included in this framework. Will require further design and engineering prior to implementation. So the redevelopment plan is really meant to be a vision and a document that tells us what steps we need to take to implement in order to achieve the build out that we're expecting in 10 years from the redevelopment plan. Councilmember Tilke, do you have any other thoughts on the redevelopment plan? Okay. Any questions on the redevelopment plan there? Okay. Certainly, you guys have seen the design guidelines. These are our guiding document to help with the design review. There's 5 sections. The introduction, blend our commercial development. So if I'm a commercial developer, I would go to my street section and find what the requirements are for that. Congregate is the public space projects. And commercial developments, we also list if you are adjacent to a public space that you need to look at the public space requirements to ensure that you're properly integrating with that public space. Dwell is residential development or projects, and then create as our appendices. And so the purpose, there's a multitude of purposes, but it's really to facilitate a review process that allows us to promote the highest quality built form, to promote good design in the district, to really overall help us achieve our goals of eliminating some of those criteria within the slum and blight factors. So we really try to ensure that those were noted. Areas that we've had challenges with were noted throughout the design guidelines. So yep, the objective is to promote continuity of the character, strengthen the pedestrian environment, create a compact and diverse downtown, establish high quality architecture, create a distinct district landscape character, create coherent and consistent street spaces, and ensure the off-street parking doesn't impact the historic character of the area. So when you're looking at those agenda packets and you're reviewing those, the design guidelines are really, one of those aspects that you're going to want to look back at to say, is this building then meeting the intent of the design and what we're trying to achieve in the Heritage District? But I also wanted to point out, we realize that there's flexibility that may be needed in design. Not every site, particularly in our Heritage District, is equal. We're certainly seeing, we have a project that we've seen come through pre-app, and they're just, constrained because some of these parcels are a lot smaller. So it takes some really creative thinking on how to properly develop to meet not only the intent of the guidelines, but to really create one of the best highest quality built projects. And so what the design guidelines say is that the Redevelopment Commission may approve alternative design approaches that foster design excellence and better meet the intent of the guidelines. So while there are, shalls, we're trying to achieve those shalls, but again, it's not equal in every single case. So we really want to make sure that we're looking at the design and understanding the constraints and the challenges and asking ourselves, does this fit the character of the Heritage District?
I think we've talked about it before, about the flexibility that the redevelopment plan and the guidelines provide the developer. It gives them a great foundation to understand the expectations we have and the quality we expect downtown. But I believe, Chris, that there are statutes, and it's probably state statutes, that allows a personal property owner to come before beginning, in this case, if it's downtown, starting here to the council, to ask for amendments to the general plan or what we anticipate downtown. And so you're going to see those once in a while. And I think what Amanda is saying, that using the redevelopment plan and the guidelines as those guidelines for you, it's very helpful. If we go back to study sessions, usually something big downtown is going to come to a study session, and to really put out any concerns you have, or are you meeting the, what we have in the guidelines, and give them the opportunity to explain at that time is really important. Because if they hear from you that there is a roadblock, then that gives them time to go back and readjust before you have to make the final decision to move it up to Planning Commission. And so I just kind of wanted to balance that a little bit, that yes, they do have a right to be here to ask for something different, and we'll use those documents, but your feedback during those study sessions is going to help that applicant either decide this isn't a good time or a good location for me at this time, or I can make it better to help meet your needs.
I have a quick question, and you might go over this under Commissioner roles and responsibilities. But as the commission, is our purpose, or our number one goal or job, is to look at the projects that are being presented, look at the guidelines, and see how close or far away they are from that? I mean, or are we looking at, the overall flow of downtown and the construction of this and the safety, and what do the people in downtown want? What do the people, the rest of the residents of Gilbert want, and the other East Valley cities? Like, is it just our opinions on the project, or are we specifically kind of trying to look at the guidelines and make sure every project that we see, is cohesive with that? It's kind of a vague question, but I'm just curious,
So certainly, the guidelines are meant to provide that foundation, and they really establish the character. They establish what we're trying to achieve. Certainly within, you mentioned flow, like circulation. All of those things have been addressed in the guidelines, and that provides that foundation. I think where the variance question comes in play is what happens when you have a project that can't meet those requirements, but it still may meet the intent of the design guidelines and the intent of the redevelopment plan. And that's really at the purview of this commission to say whether or not that project should move forward at that point, that it should move forward to planning, if it's a zoning or a variance that they're asking for, and then move forward to council. But yes, those are really the documents that you're looking at, but we want to be flexible to realizing that not every single that staff wasn't able to capture every single circumstance.
Yeah, there are a lot of properties and things that are non-conforming, and they were done a long time ago, and so to make them, up to date to our land development code, it's just impossible. So we'd rather have it progress and something happen and something be done with the property rather than it just sit as it is. So no, I completely get that.
As a follow-up, they're guidelines, not requirements. There's a big difference. And word on the street is town of Gilbert's great to work with, and so it's really at the staff level. You're asking us to consider, the whole package and what it means. And I think well before it comes to us, you guys have already done that as a staff. So, you guys do a great job before we even see it, So I think if someone makes a strong enough ask and they can defend why it needs to be done a certain way, you guys have always been open to it versus no, and then them coming forward with an ask to us. So
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you, this is an easy example. The old Western Audio building that was bought by Chimino, right? He came forth for a design review to modify that building. Our guidelines say, 2 to 3 stories are recommended on Gilbert. Well, first of all, our land development code states that you can't have 1 story. So it has to be 2 stories or above. And so the commission at the time really looked at that and said, you know what, it's a lot for this building to build at a higher height because of the constraints of the site. It's wedged between basically Gilbert Shops, which is Creamus Street, Oso, and Dog Spa, and the property just north of it. And so the commission, moved to allow for it to be a 1-story, continue to be a 1-story with the design that they had brought forth. So that's one example in which it didn't necessarily meet the recommendation of the design guidelines, but given the constraints that that applicant was facing, it made a lot of sense to allow it to remain a 1-story building. I'm not going to read through all of the roles and responsibilities today because there's quite a bit of them. But I am going to send these to you guys if you haven't seen them already. The first is certainly, the Slum Clearance and Redevelopment Commission just kind of sets a framework for what is the Redevelopment Commission, what does that mean? From there, we have our Land Development Code, and I am going to read, let's see, how many do I have here? I am going to read these out loud to you because I think, this really gets into the meat of what you're doing. So the powers and duties listed in the Land Development Code says, number 1, so all powers conferred upon municipalities by the provisions of ARS Title 36, Chapter 12, Article 3. So that's the one that I had previously shown, except the power to borrow money, issue bonds, acquire and dispose of real property, enter into contracts with the federal government or any public body, prepare a general plan for the development of the town, or approve redevelopment plans. So you have all of the powers that were listed in the ARS except for those that were just listed in the LDC, the Land Development Code. You have the power to recommend to the town council a redevelopment plan and amendments thereto. You have the power to review and make recommendations to the Planning Commission on proposals to amend the official zoning map or provisions to the zoning code. Approve with modifications and or conditions, or deny applications for design review pursuant to Article 5.6 design review. Review and recommend approval to the Town Council of design guidelines for the Heritage District Overlay District. Review and recommend approval with modifications and or conditions, or denial to the Planning Commission of special and conditional use permits pursuant to the provisions of Article 5.4 use permits. Review and comment to the Planning Commission on appeals of administrative use permits. Review and recommend approval with modifications and or conditions, or denial to the Planning Commission of preliminary subdivision plats pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 3 subdivision regulations. Review and comment on applications for zoning, general plan amendments, subdivisions, variances, design reviews, use permits within 1,000 feet of the exterior boundaries of the Heritage District, and conduct public hearings as required by the zoning code. So that gives you an overarching list of your roles and responsibilities. And again, I'll follow up with an email with the ARS. You can read that, and certainly a link to this as well. And then I just wanted to mention you also have, commissioner bylaws. And while this doesn't necessarily list out the roles and responsibilities per se, it does talk about like how meetings are conducted, at what time, what obligation staff has to announce a meeting, how much time we have to give public notice, talks about what happens if you're absent. So it says, so for example, if any member of the commission is absent for 3 consecutive meetings, or for inefficiency, neglect, or of duty or misconduct in office, said member may be removed by the mayor, but only after a hearing and after the commissioner has been given a copy of the charges at least 10 days prior to the hearing. So this really kind of just sets up some of those guidelines. It reiterates what the ARS states about appointment of the chair and vice chair, and then just talks about irregular meetings, how that happens, what happens with it, like what do we need for a quorum, what happens if we want to take a field trip, and then the order of business as we discussed earlier. So you will also get a copy of that. And then etiquette, I mean, I think the first one's pretty self-explanatory, but I felt like it was important to just reiterate, be prepared, read your packets, ask questions. Proper address for chairman would be, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, or Commissioner, last name. Ask questions through the chair. So if you have a question, you would say, Mr. Chairman, I have a question, and then you could ask the question at that point.
That's a good one. I use first names way too often, so
It's-
I'm glad we went over that.
It takes a bit to get into the flow of it, right? It certainly does. And then again, I know we talked about this, but just dialogue, have the dialogue on the dais, let the public hear, your thoughts, let the applicant hear your thoughts. It's just incredibly helpful for the applicant and for our residents and our public to be able to respond to the projects before you. All right. Any additional questions, comments? You want to talk about any of the documents, anything that you've heard today? It's a lot to process.
I just want to say thank you because I know there's been times up here where, eye contact or, like, you're like, we missed something. So it's, you guys are always very helpful, like, and where it's appropriate, like, go back and do this, So it's nice to have you guys out there as our coaches on the sidelines. So thank you for that.
Certainly.
Well, first, thank you so much for your service. And you don't have to answer tonight, but if you'll let Amanda know if you felt like this format was helpful, especially for new commissioners, because we'd like to maybe put this into place so that as a new commissioner comes in, we can help them, because it is very different sitting up there. And I know that firsthand, being new and trying to figure out, the best way to maneuver it all. But any comments or suggestions you have for us to improve would be helpful as well. Thank you.
The other item, thank you so much. That's such a great recommendation. The other item I was going to ask, we have.
Can I jump in while
Yeah.
you're doing that?
Please, yes.
This was helpful, especially the practice round that you had prepared. So thank you. And as the new commissioner, I really just wanted to say it was very helpful.
Oh,
Thank you.
Great. I'm glad that worked out. We also have hard copies of our redevelopment plan and our design guidelines. If you like to have these at your fingertips so that you can pull your agenda packet and look through them, Jocelyn and I can get copies out to you. So I'm seeing some head nods. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll get all of the commissioners a copy of the redevelopment plan, hard copy, and a copy of the design guidelines. I know I find it really helpful, of course, because I carry them everywhere. So if you do too, we would love to have those at your fingertips.
Thank you. Can you sign my copy?
Sure. Sure. Oh, goodness. Well, I appreciate you all taking the time. I know 2 hours in an afternoon, especially with how busy everyone is. Just appreciate you taking the time and being here and for your service. And I love working with all of you, so thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so you'll just need to adjourn us when you're ready.
Okay.
Unless there's any other questions. Commissioner Kendall, do you have any other questions?
No, thank you very much. This has been extremely helpful, and I appreciate the flexibility allowing me to attend online. Thank you.
Right.
Great, thank
Perfect.
you.
No other questions or comments. It's 6:03, so we are adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.